Hi, I'm Adam,
This is Kevin.
and we are Tech Guys Who Invest. This is the place for business people and investors to learn all about investing. We offer a fresh perspective on what it's like to have a day job while investing, and we share lessons learned on our investing journey. Our vision is to educate and entertain you while adding tons of value to your daily commute. Welcome to our show. Hello, listeners. This is Adam. When I started my real estate investing journey, I binge listened to Bigger Pockets podcast and was on the website a lot. Chad Carson was on episode 84, which is where I think I first heard about him. And then I read some of his articles on Bigger Pockets, and then I found his YouTube videos. And I really loved the way he broke it down and explained it in simple terms that I could understand. And I really like how his focus is on helping you do what matters to you. Chad's inspired me to think more about designing my life and living it according to what's important to me and to learn to use mini retirements, as talked about in the 4-Hour Work Week. Real estate is a way to allow that freedom of location and time that's part of my design. And Chad's real estate investing has allowed him to take mini retirements and to live in other countries and experience other cultures with his family. In this episode, we get to hear from him about all of that and more. To find references about the things we mentioned during this podcast, check the show notes. If you don't already have our free ebook, check out our website, tgwipodcast.com, to get a copy. And now I'm honored to introduce our guest, Chad, Coach Carson. Chad has invested full-time in real estate since 2003, soon after he graduated from college. Since then, he and a business partner have bought, remodeled, sold, and rented hundreds of properties and used them as a vehicle to achieve financial independence. His mission at CoachCarson.com is to help you do more of what matters. To find out more about Coach Carson, listen to his podcast, or get free investing materials, check out CoachCarson.com. All right, we are so excited to have Chad Carson on Tech Guys Who Invest today. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we're really glad you're here. And Chad, our first question is around your investing journey and how you even discovered real estate investing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I was fortunate that I had a family member who was in real estate investing. So when I was growing up, starting about middle school, my father had rental properties. So my mom was a medical professional, had her own dental practice. So she made good income from that. And their plan was that he would be the investor, she'd be the income earner, and they would kind of tag team that. And so that when she was ready to retire, they'd have a nice income stream and wealth from real estate property that they could invest their money into that. So I always watched that from, passively. And my dad, when I was in middle school, he would buy these foreclosure properties that were, really had been sitting vacant for like 3 or 4 months during the middle of the Georgia summer where I grew up. And there'd be like food in the refrigerators and stuff everywhere. And he would just drop me off there and say, "Hey, I'll be back in 3 or 4 hours. Go ahead and clean that refrigerator out." And there would be like this nasty food and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, this is horrible. Like, who would ever invest in real estate? Like, people are nuts to do this. And I swore I would never do it. And then I studied biology in college. I was kind of going the route of being a medical profession. And then I was just tired after college from playing football and doing a lot of stuff. And I said, well, why don't I just take a year or two? My dad has some books on the shelf that my dad had, and I was reading through those. And I said, this is actually sounds pretty interesting. And I don't have to go work for anybody else. What if I just try to do this for a year or two, and then I'll go back in the real world and get a job or go to medical school?
Right.
And I drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and decided that I liked having the freedom of not having to go work a regular job. And I just kind of scrapped by and started investing in real estate actually right out of college. And that was my start. It was really, investing is a misnomer. I was buying properties and reselling them, or I was finding deals for other people. So I was making fees, or I was flipping houses and making a markup on the flips. So it was more of a business. It's like Walmart, but it's having big, huge pieces of inventory. You just buy and sell big houses. But that's how I cut my teeth in the business. And eventually I have a business partner. And so 18 years ago, we started, and eventually we started having enough revenue and enough savings to set some aside and buy some rental properties as well. And that's what we do today. We're almost exclusive buy and hold rental properties. We loan some money. We have some financing as well. But it's pretty much buy and hold, but we got to start with flipping houses.
That's great.
All right. Well, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. We're definitely going to touch on those books later because we love to read and we love sharing information. So those formative books are going to be something we dive into. But you mentioned something. We were talking about investing being a misnomer when you weren't actually investing. You're doing more of arbitrage. Can you break down why you were talking about that not being investing?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. I mean, you can look at it from the tax angle, that when you buy it and you sell a property, that's ordinary income. So you're having self-employment taxes. So it's the equivalent of people or W-2 salaries that gets taken out of your salary, and your employer pays part of that. You pay part of that. It's about 15.5%, I guess, something like that, of whatever you make. That's one portion of taxes, and then you have whatever your tax rate is. So it's a business. It's a short-term play, and so it's not as tax advantaged. Whereas when you invest long term, you're putting money into the property and you're holding it, and until you sell it, you don't pay any taxes on the gain that you have, and you also have a lot of there's other tax benefits, which hopefully people start studying when they get into real estate investing. But there's depreciation that shelters some of your income, and so all those benefits of being an investor, a lot of them in the tax side of things, come when you are investing for the long haul. What I did, I needed to put food on the table, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a business, because as soon as I bought and sold that property, I used a lot of that money just to pay my bills, and so that it was a structural difference, and it's also just a mindset different for us. That we had to make money, we had to pay the bills, we had to do the things that people normally do with their W-2 salary. And so I looked at real estate that way, and I actually sold some properties early in my career that I really wish I still had, because they were such good locations, and today have grown a lot. But I had to do it. But I had to pay the bills and make a little bit of money. And so making $10,000 then, instead of waiting for $100,000 10 years from now, seems like a bad deal. But for me at the time, that was just what you had to do.
There you go.
Nice. So, Chad, I know that you have done some neat things with your lifestyle that real estate investing has really unlocked for you. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the freedom that real estate can allow one to have. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. Yeah. But the flexibility to travel in particular has been a big motivation for me. I have my wife and I have two kids. And so when I actually first met my wife before we were married, we started talking about where we wanted to go. She was a Spanish teacher and loved traveling to Latin America. I had studied some foreign languages in college, but just had that itch to go out and do it and travel. And I really think that was a big motivation for me. Even becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a full-time investor, was even before I got to the point where I had technically, financial independence, I had a lot of flexibility. I could take off and travel, and to the extent that I could save the money and do it, there was nobody telling me this is how you have to run your business. This is what you have to do. So I think that starting from that point of freedom and understanding, that's the reason I did this in the first place. I wanted to be able to control my day-to-day schedule. I wanted to be able to have the flexibility to work as little or as much as I wanted to. And often that means working a lot. Entrepreneurs work a lot and they work long hours, but that freedom was always the driver. And the thing, I didn't have it figured out all along, and I'm always still learning, but the more money you make, the more wealth you build, the more income you can generate from real estate, that incrementally increases the amount of freedom and flexibility you have to do other things. And so, for example, in 2009, kind of in the depths of the Great Recession, my wife and I didn't have kids at that point, and we took a 4-month trip with just our backpacks and went to Spain, traveled around there, went to Peru and lived with a family for a month, and I learned how to speak Spanish. We backpacked down to Chile, went to Patagonia, went back up to Buenos Aires. It just had this fantastic, call it mini retirement or sabbatical, just detaching ourselves from the whole pattern of growing and working. And for me, kind of a type A personality, just go, goals, achieve. It was the best thing I could have ever done. And it pretty much set a course for me that it reminded me that, okay, freedom, flexibility, this is why you're doing this. Like, let's incorporate this kind of thing nonstop in your life. Don't wait until you're 70 years old to enjoy the fruits of retirement. Like, let's do it right now. And that's what got me into the financial independence, retire early movement, and writing about it and blogging about it. And we've continued to do that. In 2016, with our kids, we went to Ecuador this time in South America and lived there for 17 months, had an apartment. Kids went to school, became fluent in Spanish, made a lot of friends there. And that's our particular thing is travel. But I think my message for everybody else is just whatever freedom means to you, building your whole investment business around that, your investment philosophy around that is an important thing to do. Because otherwise you can get in the growth treadmill forever, and there's always going to be more and always going to be more. But if not having some balance there of tasting the fruits of what you want earlier on in life, that's a nice thing to do.
Absolutely. That is a cool story. And when you're talking about freedom, you had something that you defined. You and your wife, before you had kids, you were talking about, hey, this is what we would love to do. If you're trying to coach somebody and tell them or help them define what that freedom means and get off that growth treadmill, how would you guide them to defining that for them?
It's actually a harder thing to do. I know you guys know that, but it's, sometimes when we're kids, it's easy to do. Like, when I grow up, I want to do this, or wouldn't this be great if I could do that? And we sort of get it like smashed out of us or something, we get like the reality of the world, the grind. I don't know what it is, but like I have found the same thing when I'm talking to people. I'm having to like kind of coax it out of them. Like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, well, that's not practical. I can't think about that. It's my recommendation is just to daydream a little bit. Like be like a little kid. I feel like sometimes this whole lifestyle I've been building is like, I pinch myself. I'm like, this is like I'm a big kid. Like I wake up in the morning, I'm like, what am I going to do with my day, with my life? It can be a little intimidating sometimes, but I think that excitement, it goes along with the responsibility and the heaviness too. Like, oh man, what am I going to do with my life? And so I think just keeping it light. What's fun for you? What do you enjoy doing? Do you have hobbies? Do you have sports? I like learning foreign languages. I like reading. I like traveling. Other people I know like to garden. They like to bike. Some people like to tinker, like just build stuff in their garage, take cars apart. I mean, just find something. It could be this frivolous. It has no practical purpose. It doesn't matter in the moving your career forward, and like build your life and balance your life with that, because those are the things that as a kid you would have followed, and you wouldn't have thought about it. You're just like, that's fun. Let's just do that. And the cool thing is often those things turn into practical purposes. Sometimes they don't have to, but I write a blog about things that I just like learning, and 5-6 years later, it didn't start away. It turned into a little business, and it can have some revenue. So if revenue is your thing, or practical things are what you want, those passions and those things that you really enjoy can turn into that if that's what you want from it.
Yeah, I love that idea of designing your life and not letting it happen to you. So many people I either work with or have worked with or interact with find themselves somewhere, and it's kind of like life just sort of happened to them, or they went through the pattern that they think they're supposed to with school, and then get a job, and then try to work your way up, and turns into a bit of a grind when you get to a certain age. And I love that idea of just designing your life and living life on your terms, the way you want to, whatever that looks like. And that's a big reason why Kevin and I do this, is to try and help people discover a way to freedom, which we believe is real estate investing. It's interesting. Some people who haven't yet educated themselves on it initially think, well, that's risky. It's very risky to invest in real estate. And oh my gosh, I couldn't think about quitting my job. But actually, it's empowering. It's uplifting. I feel like it enables freedom to invest in real estate. So
absolutely, I agree with you 100% there.
Me too.
So Chad, we know your nickname's Coach, and you have students that you coach. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about why people need coaching and how it helps them. For example, some people don't realize they could use a coach, or how much a coach would benefit them, especially as they're starting their real estate journey, or even if they've just started it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sports background, so if people are watching on YouTube, you can see the football helmet in the background. But I love I love pickup basketball. I used to play soccer, so sports were always in my blood growing up, and so I always admired and had a healthy respect for some of my best coaches. And a lot of the people I looked up to were coaches, and really what they were just teachers who were out in kind of getting into the sport or whatever with you. Like they were out there coaching you and teaching you hands on. And I think the reason coaches are important, and it could be a virtual coach, it could be like just you reading a book. Like I love books, and you guys mentioned that too. I see some of my favorite authors as my coach. They're teaching me, they're helping me, and that's the beautiful thing about information. Like I feel like it's a big playground out there now because information is so readily available, and for the cost of a book, a Kindle book, $7 or $10 or something, or a real book, $15. Like that's so inexpensive to get a condensed, organized version of what's the best ideas in somebody's mind. And if you access information that way, even a book can be coaching. You can circle things and ask questions and engage with the information. And I think that's important. But also, I like in-person coaches as well, or people who push you a little bit. And that could be in the form of a local mentor. Like for me in real estate investing, some of my private investors who loaned me money early on when I didn't have any money, I had a particular professor at Clemson who ended up loaning us some money and partnering with us on a few of our deals early on. It was a really big deal to have somebody who had more experience and more knowledge be able to look at what we're doing in real time and give us feedback. And if he had a big objection to it, he's like, I don't know about that. He did very often. We would be able to listen to that, and it would guide us a little bit. And that's the value of a coach, is that they can see things about you or what you're doing that you're blind to. Like we're all blinded. We have blinders on, every one of us. And if we're coachable, if we listen to that, and whether that's a book, whether that's a person, whether that's just events in life, if we're coachable and we receive those lessons, that's how we get better. That's how we improve. And to the extent that we're not coachable, we're stubborn, we know it all. We're just not going to listen to anybody because we're so smart, or because that person doesn't know what they're talking about. That's that kind of a recipe for stagnation and for being, just stiff. Like you're not going to grow. You're not going to be flexible. And so I'm a bit, obviously I adapted Coach Carson as my blog name just because of that love of coaching, love of the idea of teaching. And so I'm definitely a big fan of that, both for myself and with other people, and also helping as a coach to other people too.
I love it. I think that we agree with you 100%. Coaches can come in all shapes, forms, and various sources, especially on the internet. A podcast could be your coach too, right? So that's a cool thing that you mentioned. If somebody is stuck in that 9-to-5 mentality where you got to work, you got to save to retire, how do you help them see the light differently?
Well, savings is definitely important. So I'll just commend them, pat them on the back if they're doing that. I mean, if when I wrote my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, there's one whole chapter basically saying, I don't care how you invest. If you don't save money, it really is kind of all for naught, because you got to have some capital. So if you're in a W-2 job and you're saving 25%, half your money, that's great. That's a good start. But I think it does go beyond that. Like at some point, that's going to get you somewhere. That's going to be a good start. If you want to accelerate things, if you're happy with your job and you want to do it for the next 20 years, cool. But if you want to accelerate things, there's other things you can do. And one of those, real estate investing, I think is a good example of what people call a side hustle. It's something that is kind of a hybrid between investing and a business, an entrepreneurship venture. And if you can start some side hustles, whether it's real estate or whether it's another business where you're selling something you work on the weekend, or just start working on being an entrepreneur and having that mentality of starting something, of taking little bitty risk that might have a return. And even if you made a couple $100 a month or something from this little venture that you do on the side, it gets you out of the mindset that your security and your financial future is dependent on a paycheck from a business. Because we all know there's no security in that over the long run. You're as great as that company could be, they have other objectives other than making you secure and taking care of your future. And so it's on you. That's the message of the 21st century, financially. It's on you to figure this thing out. And I think it's beyond just money. You got to get the mindset that you can take care of this. You can handle this. This is okay. And some of that's education. Some of that's just practice. If you're in a job, you've practiced things, you're competent. just practice being an entrepreneur, practice getting out there and starting a little thing on the side for 5 hours on the weekend. And that'll give you so much confidence that you can handle this, and that it's not as intimidating as it might seem.
Yeah, it's never been more relevant advice than right now with the COVID situation. When we're recording this, COVID's happening, and a lot of companies are laying off or furloughing people, had to let people go who, people who thought they were really secure in their job. So it's so true. And speaking of mindset, which you mentioned there, that's a good segue into a question we want to ask you about mental barriers. A lot of people have mental barriers to investing in real estate, especially for their first time, if it's new to them. What have you seen there? And kind of like, how do you ask people to think about that if they are stuck somewhere mentally?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the common mental barriers I see are related to fear.
Mm,
And there's so many different fears that we have. I mean, to be human is to have fears. So like we all have them. I have them. You guys have them. I know.
yeah.
But I think the mental barrier is that's okay. Like it's like the best entrepreneurs all have fear too. Like, and the best sports people all had fears. Like I remember people who would, before a football game, they're a star. Like they would go throw up in the bathroom because they're so like nervous before a game. I mean, that's
Wow.
pretty graphic, but that's real. Like that's nobody, even the best players had that kind of nervousness. And I used to tell myself that if I'm nervous before a game, like good, like that means I recognize how important this is. And to the very few times when I wasn't nervous when I was playing football, I knew this game I was like, all right, you just kind of went through the motions, and it was a bad game. I didn't perform well. So first and foremost, like just understand that you're not the first one to be afraid of taking a chance, of investing, of losing money. Like that's part of the game. But there is an optimistic message with that the investing knowledge, like if you become an expert even on a little piece of investing, you can eliminate or you can conquer some of that fear by knowledge, by just being aware of things, by learning. And that's why I love books. That's why I love listening to podcasts, because I've learned that just the education I can get can solve a lot of the problems that I thought were super risky things. And in the end, I learn a little piece, a little knowledge, a little technique, something that helps me reduce the risk and buy a property where it's almost like, yeah, there's a few little things that could go wrong, but I've got the big things taken care of so that I'm not going to really crash and burn. And if you can get to that point where you at least feel a little bit more confident, it's like stepping over a little crack in the ground instead of a big cavern. You're not going to fall into this big crevasse. It's just, all right, you got to make a little jump. There you go. Take a little baby step. And that's really what investors do. They're not taking big, huge risks. They're taking little small risk, and then another small risk, and then another small risk, and just continually moving forward.
Yeah, and the to that point with the investors taking what looks as big risk, they've generally speaking have built up the systems, the time, the teams to handle what appears to be a big risk. So those little risks that they've taken in the past have added up to that, I guess if you want to call it, not necessarily an immunity, but they see it differently. They see it as something that they've done in the past, and like, okay, this is now another way for me to grow. And all the systems are in place in the event something goes wrong. So I think that's also another point that's worth mentioning when it comes to taking risks.
Can I give an example of that? Because I think you're
Please.
exactly right. Like the systems. So when you're buying a property, a lot of people, especially on their first deals, they get super intimidated by the process of actually buying a property. And they're like, all right, there's things that could go wrong with the property. There's things that could go wrong with this loan and this 100-page document I'm signing with this bank. There's things that could go wrong on the title. Like you just see like one thing after another. And the way I break that down is first I have a checklist. Like all right, what are the things that I got to remember? As simple as that. Like when airline pilots, when they fly an airplane, they're required by law to have a checklist. Well, I have a checklist when I close a property. Like and I've built this checklist because I forgot stuff. Like, wait a minute, I got to closing, the day of closing, I don't have insurance. Like, what am I doing? Like, that's crazy. But it happens when you have you're thinking of everything else. So I think it's something as simple as a checklist that you can, and you can, this sounds like a plug, but I have a free checklist you can get. Like if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, it's the checklist I use for every one of my properties. And that's a shortcut. And that's the example of how you can reduce risk by borrowing ideas, borrowing checklists, borrowing systems from other people. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. you can borrow some of that knowledge, and then you can build a team around you so that when you're going through the process of buying a property, you could have a real estate agent who could help you evaluate the market value to make sure you're not overpaying for the property. That's one team member. You could have an attorney who could do, or a title company could do the title work for you, and you pay them a fee so they guarantee that you're getting a good title to this property. You could hire an inspector and a contractor who could go through the property and check every single system in the property and tell you exactly what's wrong and how much it's going to cost, and so on and so on and so on. So that if you know the things you need to look for, like with a checklist or something, then you can borrow expertise from other people, and you're just sort of the captain of the boat. You've got to drive that boat, but you can let other people jump on the boat with you and pay them a fee, and they can help you identify and reduce risk to the point where you get there and you're like, okay, I don't know for sure that this property is going to go up in value over the next 10 years. I don't, there's a little bit of fuzziness. I think it's going to be $20,000 in repairs. It could be 25, maybe it's going to be 15, but you sort of set limits on what your risk might be. And that's what I mean by taking those little baby steps. You've taken it from the whole thing could fall apart to it's a $15,000 to $25,000 remodel job. The rent is probably $950 to $1,050. And so you've got these limits, and all of that comes from systems. It comes from team, and that's where the knowledge pays off. If you can build just enough knowledge to be able to drive that ship, then you can more confidently move forward and actually buy a property.
Yeah, I really like I like that idea there of breaking it down into little pieces, because it's so intimidating when it's the big thing, but you break it down into those little pieces that you can manage, and you're able to manage that. So that's pretty cool. And it sounds like, you've given us some really good tips and even some tools. That checklist, by the way, we'll put that in the show notes. That's pretty awesome stuff. What are some habits that some of your more successful students have? I know, you've probably seen some students who really seem to shine, and a lot of times we'll find that's because they have success habits, things they do that make them stand out. Anything come to mind there, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of pieces of real estate that are important, but I think one of the biggest obstacles students have and that successful students overcome is this, how to buy properties and find good deals. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple things. There's a mindset that when sometimes people think, well, I'm just going to go out and look at 3 or 4 properties and find a deal. And they get disappointed because looking at 3 or 4 is not enough. The lesson that a lot of successful students learn, either the hard way, or I try to coach them a little bit on this, is that when you're early on in your career, especially, you got to think of like a treasure hunt, where you're going out and you got to turn over rocks looking for the treasure. And you might turn over 50 rocks, or you might turn over 100 rocks. And the students who are successful are typically patient enough and persistent enough early on to get over that hump, because there's a learning curve. Right now I don't look at 100 properties to get one. It's just not, I'm more efficient. I know what I'm looking for. I have different ways to bring deals to me rather than me having to go search for them. But it's like everything else. When you're new, when you're learning to ride the bike, you've got to understand it's going to take you longer. You're going to do things a little slower. And so some of my more successful students have overcome that. Like I can think of one guy in particular. His name's Mike, and he actually edits my podcast. So I know him pretty well. But he was a student of mine in my course, and he made 11 offers on 19 properties, I think, that he looked at before he got his first deal. And he was about 7 or 8, offer number 7 or 8. And he and I had a conversation just briefly. And he's like, I don't think this thing's right for me. I'm just going to go ahead and move on from this. And I said, Mike, you might be right. Like, it might not be right for you. But if you will just stick with us and don't make a goal to do a deal, make a goal to make a certain number of offers. And let's just say 15. Like if you make 15 offers, we can then accurately say that what you're doing is not working. Like, all right, that's cool. And then maybe you adjust strategies, maybe you take a break. But I said, just stick with it. Just stick with it to 15 offers. And he was at 7 or 8. He got to 11 and got a deal. Like I didn't know that was going to happen, but I had a hunch that if he just stayed with it, if he's just persistent, I just had to give him a goal like beyond what he thought he could do. Yeah. And that's often the way it works. Is the knowledge compounds. Every time he looked at a property, he learned a little bit more about what he did or didn't want. His agent learned a little bit more about what he didn't want. And that knowledge you can't do it any other way. You can't learn it in a book. You can't listen to it on a podcast. You actually just have to go do it. and look at properties and make offers. And there's a lot of people who aren't willing to push past that. It's a really tough thing to be rejected 10, 12, 13 times and still keep going.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's a fantastic story when it comes to that persistence and those success habits. You're talking about really the not getting hung up on the end goal per se. And this is a testament to what you're talking about with the checklist. Like, you do things, you build processes to a point where the success becomes a byproduct of all the things that you're doing. And that is an important insight that a coach, I think, is going to help you see. Because as you're in it, especially if you're starting, all you're thinking about is, I got to do this deal. I got to do this. I need to get a deal to be a legitimate investor. That's something that I've struggled with, something that you have to navigate through. So when somebody approaches in a situation like that, is your mentality to help them see, look, okay, yeah, it's great. You want this investment property, but the importance is the process. Is that how you navigate them through that?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Definitely. There's actually football coaches, and I used to study John Wooden, a basketball coach, a lot. He was the same way. He would bring in these Hall of Fame basketball players like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, some of the best players in the country, and he would have them for an hour on the first day of practice work on tying their shoe. Like, tie your shoe, untie your shoe, roll your sock up, roll your sock down. And these guys would get like exasperated. I can just imagine. They're like, what is this old coach doing? Like, this guy's making me tie my shoe. And he would demonstrate to them. He was like, look, these little processes, little things we do, they all matter. Like, that's what being a championship basketball player is about, is every little thing you put together. Because if you didn't tie your shoe correctly, if you didn't put your sock on correctly, you probably get a blister. And if you get a blister in practice, you're going to miss 2 or 3 days of practice. You're not going to perform your best in the next game, and we might lose the game. And if we lose the game, we might not win a championship. You guys want to win a championship, right? They'd be like, oh yeah, okay. And so he would connect a championship to tying their shoe. And in real estate investing, we want to have financial independence. We want to have properties that have enough wealth to pay our income. But we can't do that. Like, you can't go out and just win a championship. You can't go out and just do financial independence. What you can do is go out and do driving for dollars for 2 hours and look for vacant properties. You can build a checklist. You can go download a checklist and study that and make sure you understand the process. You can listen to a podcast with the intention of learning something that helps you accomplish something, and then go do it. Right? Those are processes. Those are steps. And if you find, like, that's why I like studying people who have systems and processes already in place, because then I can go borrow that, adapt it, change it to my needs. But I'm not just floundering around like just doing this thing or that thing. I'm following that process. And then the end result, I hope, and you have to adapt sometimes and adjust. That's part of being an entrepreneur. But my end goal, I hope, then is the results I want, which is buying a property, which is making money. But the secret, kind of not so secret is you have to flip that around. You've got to start with those steps. Otherwise, you got to tie your shoes. You got to put the socks on, because those are the steps that lead to what you want.
That is great. I really wish I had you or someone like you when I first started. And when I first started, I didn't even have the mindset that it was an investment to pay a coach like you to help me. And now I get that. But back then I was looking at it from a cost perspective. And luckily a couple years or so in, I did change that mindset, invested in a coach. And that's how Kevin and I met. This podcast wouldn't exist without it. But having things like that you just mentioned can help just launch someone forward so much faster than they otherwise could get. And especially if you're the type of person who will give up,
right.
You're much more likely to give up too soon if you don't have someone like yourself with experience who could say, it's not time yet. You got to keep making those offers, and then give you those other little super valuable nuggets to look for. Chad, I know you have kids. Do you share some of these lessons with them?
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes they come in and listen when I'm recording a podcast episode or something, and they're starting. They've learned my intro to my podcast. And like, Dad always says, you can call me coach. You invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do what matters. And I don't know that they're kind of like a parrot at this point. I don't know if they're really absorbing that, but I think they're getting it a little bit. And my wife and I, we're learning. Like, we're not perfect by any means, but we're trying to apply some of the principles that you learn it as a team, you learn in a business, just to being a better parents, like working as a team together. So we'll have like a family meeting on Sunday nights, and it's nice. It's very informal. It's just dinner, but we'll bring up little things like, hey, it's kind of higher level things like what's important to us. We always told you that being helpful is important, or being kind to people, and we'll try to tell a story about that. And so just some of those principles of coaching, of just caring, like just being present. I think that's what stands out to me about the best coaches I've ever had, is that they just cared about you. Like they demonstrated that. And the old school coaches, it's kind of a weird thing. Like my coach in college would scream at me and yell at me, kind of like boot camp Marine style. Like I think that's shifting a little bit. Like we're realizing you don't have to be a Marine boot camp to coach somebody. You can actually just encourage them. And that's what I loved about John Wooden. He was always, he was juxtaposed to like Bobby Knight at Indiana, he would throw the chair across the arena and scream at people how stupid they were. And, he won some championships. So, okay, like maybe that worked. But I think what John Wooden demonstrated, he won 10 championships in like a 12-year period, was his motivation was always to show them what his expectations were. He's like, I expect you to be up here, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton. You're so good that we're going to redo practice because y'all did not perform up to your standards. And we're going to do something really hard again. We're going to do that over again, do it over again, not because you're stupid, but because I expect a lot more from you. And the people who respected a coach like that, they would be disappointed that their coach is disappointed in them. And I like that approach to leadership, to parenting, to trying to motivate people, is that to the extent that you can, find the things that motivate them, tell them this is where you're good. Like you have potential, but you're going to have to do some things to reach that potential. And that's sort of where we are with our kids. It's just, let's find out what they're passionate about. Let's find out the things they're interested in, and just whatever it is, if it's, dance, if it's piano, if it's learning. Right now we're into Star Wars and Harry Potter. And like, we watched a marathon of the 9 Star Wars movies in like a 3-week period during the quarantine. So we were just like so much into that Jedi and mindset. And, but there's some lessons there somewhere, but it's just a lot of fun too, to kind of nerd
That's
out
awesome.
with my kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Use Jedi mind tricks as part of your coaching also.
Yeah. My daughters are actually trying to do that. She's like, you will give me that candy. And I'm like, you will not eat that candy and go to the dark side.
Nice. So as a coach, and you've been studying, you seem like a lifelong learner. If you were to have a coaching session with your younger self, what would you say? How would you coach yourself with the lessons you've accumulated today?
I love that question. Yeah, I think I talked about some practical things. Like when I first started just in real estate investing, some of the mistakes I made were there's this balance between the numbers on a property. Like when you look at the cash flow and the numbers and everything on a spreadsheet, that's one component of it. But then there's this like kind of just going out to the property and understanding the neighborhood and the quality of the construction of the property. And there's just those are a little bit more difficult to quantify, but if you had 2 numbers on, like if you had $10,000 in cash flow on 2 different properties, the one was in a neighborhood that had a little bit more potential, that the next door neighbor wasn't dealing drugs, that the property was built with better construction materials, like that is not, you're not comparing apples with those 2 properties. And we made the mistake sometimes of chasing better numbers and ignoring that qualitative side of real estate investing. And I think that was a mistake, and we paid for it for a while. We had some properties that I call them like bubble gum on the bottom of my shoe properties. Like they got stuck in my foot and never could like get them off. I'm having to try to get rid of them and sell them at a loss. And so I think I would have learned a little bit more about that. But then again, like I'm sort of loath to go back and tell my younger self to change that, because I've learned so many things from that. I think that having that bubble gum stuck on the bottom of my shoe is like maybe the way the stubborn brain had to learn, like, okay, don't do that. Like if you touch the fire, you will get burned. Like, don't do that. And those are some of the lessons I learned. But for everybody listening to that, maybe you'll learn from my lesson as well. But try to look at the numbers. You always got to analyze the numbers, but also understand that you've got to find properties in locations that have potential, because those numbers you're always making a guess on the numbers. It's just an approximation, but the better the location is, the better the yard is, all those things, the numbers will get a lot better. It'll be easier to access those numbers as a result.
Yeah. Such good wisdom. It's so tempting when you're struggling to find a deal to see some of those really cheap properties in a bad neighborhood and try and go for it. But it's so much headache. You're essentially just paying for that additional risk,
Yeah.
one way or the other.
Yeah.
So, Chad, if someone were listening to this show and they are inspired to start investing in real estate, but they've never done it before, they're not even sure where to get started, what would your advice be about the next thing they should do?
Well, there's a lot of different strategies to get into real estate investing. So some of this will depend on where you are in life and what stage you are. But if you are willing, one of my favorite strategies in all of real estate to get started is something called a house hack. And I don't know if you guys talked about that on the show before, but it's essentially turning your residence or thinking about your residence as a hybrid between an investment and your place you live in. And so many people, especially early on, you're working hard, you're finally making some money, you feel like you've earned it. Like, let's just go buy the dream house or the white picket fence that doesn't make any economic sense, but it's just comfortable and it's great. And like eventually that's fine. Like I don't have any problem with like luxury items if you've earned it, but in your 20s and your 30s, or even if you're late to the game and you're in your 50s or 60s, if you're willing to move into a property that's maybe a duplex or a house with a garage apartment or a house with a basement apartment that you can Airbnb or something, if you can figure out a way to generate some income from the house that you live in and buy a little bit more modest property, one that the price to rent ratio is a little bit better so that when you move out, you might be able to keep that property and still have it rent well. This is a perfect way to get into the game because you've got to live somewhere. Getting owner occupant financing is much easier than getting an investment loan. You can often get 3.5% or 5% down payments to move into a property using like an FHA program, which is a federally subsidized kind of insurance program for home loans. So if you can get into a property like a duplex or a house with a basement apartment or something and get a low down payment loan, which is a low interest long-term loan, you've pretty much set yourself up with a lot of the big challenges of real estate investing. And you can live there, you can learn the business a little bit over the next year or two. And then if you ever decide you want to move on and get to a bigger house, you can keep that property, keep the loan in place. And now you've got a cash flowing rental property that you can add to your portfolio. And even if you never did another deal, if that's the only thing you ever did, that one property, you're going to reduce your living expenses for the next 2 years. You're going to have one rental property that eventually will grow into something, a big chunk of wealth. And that's pretty amazing. One decision that you do for 2 or 3 years can make a difference. And that's why I think it's a great way to get started.
Nice.
Love that. And that is definitely something that people should learn more about because it can leapfrog you to the next step, wherever it is you want to go. Now, we wouldn't be the tech guys who invest if we didn't ask about technology. And I know that we're going to pivot this one, do a little bit differently. You've been watching Star Wars with your kids. What would be your favorite piece of technology from that Star Wars universe?
Oh man, I would love to do a demo project where you just tear apart the house with a lightsaber. I mean, that would absolutely like make my day. My daughters would love that too. So, just you imagine like cutting that sheetrock, just like the problem is you're probably going to tear the whole house down with the lightsaber. That could be bad.
Burn it.
Yeah. No, maybe you could rip the tub out. Yeah, it would be fun in the process. Maybe that's not the great idea, but or you can just use the Force to. I've got a house right now that we're having a contract, and it's got this tiny little foundation. There's some other reasons I want the property, and it's going to work out okay. But the crawl space on this property, you can't even call it a crawl space. It's 12 inches tall. Like you cannot get under there, and you have to tear up floors essentially to get to where some of these pipes are. And so if you could use the Force, it could get Master Yoda to raise that house up a little bit for me for like at least 4 hours or a day. So we put some blocks underneath there and increase the size of that crawl space. That would be nice as well.
Excellent. All right. I like those answers. I agree. It's hard not to say lightsaber. Some of their ships are pretty awesome too, though. So
that's true.
All right, Chad, thanks so much. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate the value that you've provided to our listeners. Can you let us know where people can find out about you and please tell us about your podcast as well?
Great. Yeah, thanks. I hang out online at coachcarson.com. And if you go there, every week I produce podcast content. I have the Real Estate and Financial Independence podcast. So you can find that on any podcast player that you happen to be listening to. So I'd love for you to connect with me there. You can also go to my website. I have a blog, and I mentioned I think you guys will have a link to it. I have a newsletter where you get a free investing toolkit that has things like my checklist, has a deal worksheet that helps you evaluate a property and understand the formulas that you're looking for. There's a few other goodies like some spreadsheets and things that I use for tracking my financials. So yeah, if you want to check that out and get those for free and hang out with me over at coachcarson.com or my podcast, I would love that. I'd love to see you over there.
Great. So guys, check that out. And thanks again, Chad. Really great having you on.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Kevin. It was a lot of fun.
That's it for this episode of Tech Guys Who Invest. This is Adam.
And this is Kevin. Thank you so much for listening to us. Don't forget to join our Facebook page where we're building a community of investors so that we can share ideas, tips, and other ways to help us get out of the rat race. If you found value in this podcast, it would mean the world to us if you could share it with your network. Lastly, we love feedback. It's how we get better. So if you wouldn't mind spending 30 seconds and leaving us an honest review on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever platform you're using, that would be super sweet. If you want to get on Adam or Kevin's calendar, go to tgwipodcast.com/contact. We want to help you invest safely, wisely, and ultimately get you out of the rat race. Thanks again.